On a rainy evening, a kind-hearted teenage girl helps a stranded businessman. Unaware that her small act of kindness will change her life forever, Ava never expected that stopping to help a stranger would lead to something life-changing. She had no idea who he really was, or how their brief encounter would unravel deep-seated prejudices, challenge powerful beliefs, and spark an unexpected transformation. But when she wakes up the next morning to a shocking surprise, she realizes her kindness has set something far bigger in motion. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for more incredible stories. The night was cold, and rain poured steadily over the small town. Streetlights flickered as Ava hurried home from her part-time job, her worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, shielding her face from the rain. A few blocks ahead, a sleek black luxury car stood still on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking. Inside, Ethan Carter sat gripping the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. The engine had died minutes ago, leaving him stranded in an unfamiliar part of town. He checked his phone, no signal. With each passing car that ignored him, his frustration grew. Ava slowed her steps as she noticed a man standing by the car. His suit was soaked, and he looked completely out of place in this part of town. Most people would have walked past without a second glance, but not Ava. She hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. "Sir, do you need help?" she asked, raising her voice over the rain. Ethan barely spared her a glance. "No, I am fine," he muttered, adjusting his cufflinks as if that would fix the problem. But Ava was not convinced. "It does not look like it," she said, tilting her umbrella to cover him. "Your car will not start?" Ethan let out a sharp breath. "That is obvious, is it not?" His tone was cold, but Ava did not take it personally. She had seen this before, people who acted tough because they were not used to needing help. "I can call someone for you," she offered. He hesitated, then finally nodded. Ava took out her phone, only to realize her battery was dead. She glanced around and spotted a familiar face across the street, her friend Malik, who ran a small food stand. She jogged over, borrowed his phone, and quickly dialed the only mechanic she knew. When she returned, Ethan was still standing there, arms crossed. "Mechanic said he will be here, but it will take a while," she explained. "You should not wait out here in the rain." Ethan frowned. "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" Ava pointed down the street. "There's a cafe nearby. You can wait there." He hesitated, looking her up and down. Trusting strangers was not something he did. But as another gust of wind sent icy rain down his back, he reluctantly gave in. "Fine," he said. Ava smiled. "Great. Let's go." They walked in silence toward the cafe, rainwater splashing under their feet. Ava, holding the umbrella between them, barely noticed the curious glances from passers-by. Ethan, however, noticed everything. People greeted Ava as they passed. A nod here, a warm smile there. A woman at a fruit stand waved at her. A man fixing a bicycle called her by name. "You seem to know everyone," Ethan observed, his voice carrying a hint of curiosity. Ava shrugged. "It is a small town. People look out for each other." Ethan did not respond. That was not how his world worked. In his world, people smiled when they wanted something, and friendships were transactions. Seeing how easily Ava moved through this community was unsettling. They reached the cafe, a small, cozy place with fogged-up windows and a glowing sign that flickered slightly. Ethan hesitated again. "You do not have to come in," Ava said, sensing his reluctance. "But it is warm and they make good coffee." After a pause, Ethan stepped inside. The scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee filled the air. A few customers sat at wooden tables, chatting quietly. Ethan fell out of place, but Ava walked in like she belonged. Because she did, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "2 coffees, please," she told the man behind the counter. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You do not have to." "I know," she cut in, offering a small smile. "But I want to." Ethan did not argue, but something about it unsettled him. No one ever gave him anything without expecting something in return. As they sat at a small table, Ethan took a sip of the coffee. It was not the expensive blend he was used to, but it was hot, and right now, That was enough. He glanced at Ava. Why did you help me? Ava stirred her coffee, thinking, my dad used to say that if you can help someone, you should, no matter who they are. Ethan leaned back in his chair. That is nice in theory, but the world does not work like that. Ava smiled faintly. Maybe that is why it is such a mess. Ethan had no response to that. Before he could say anything else, a rough voice interrupted them. Hey, kid. They turned to see the cafe owner, an older man with a thick mustache and an irritated look on his face. His eyes landed on Ethan's wet suit and unshaven face, and his expression hardened. We do not do handouts here, the man said sharply. Ethan's grip tightened around his cup. Excuse me? The owner crossed his arms. I do not know what you're trying to pull, but I am not running a shelter. If you cannot pay, you cannot stay. Ava's eyes widened. Wait, he is not. Ethan stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He could feel every eye in the cafe on him, the silent judgment, the assumptions. He had built an empire, commanded boardrooms full of executives, and yet, in this moment, none of that mattered. They saw only what they wanted to see. Ava stood up, too, her voice firm. He paid for his coffee. And even if he did not, treating someone like this is wrong. The owner looked at her, then at Ethan and scoffed. Fine, but do not cause any trouble. Ethan did not wait for another word. He grabbed his coat and turned toward the door. Ava followed, her heart pounding. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but Ethan's anger had not faded. He let out a harsh breath, staring at the empty street. I should have expected that, he muttered. Ava shook her head. No, you should expect better. For the first time that night, Ethan had nothing to say. Ethan stepped out into the night, the cafe door swinging shut behind him. The cold air did little to cool the heat rising in his chest. He had been insulted before, but this was different. He was not being judged for his decisions, his business tactics, or his wealth. He was being judged for how he looked, like a man with nothing. Ava caught up to him, her hands shoved into the pockets of her thin jacket. I am sorry about that, she said, her voice softer now. People here, they can be quick to assume things. Ethan let out a dry chuckle. You do not have to apologize for them. Ava sighed. I know. It should not be like that. She kicked at a loose stone on the sidewalk before glancing up at him. People are so stuck in their ways. They think they know someone just by looking at them. Ethan nodded but said nothing. For a moment, they walked in silence, rain dripping from the edges of their coats. Then Ava spoke again, her voice carrying a quiet determination. I want to get out of here one day. Go to college. Make something of myself. Ethan glanced at her. What is stopping you? She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Money, mostly. It is hard to chase dreams when you are just trying to make it through the month. Ethan scoffed. Dreams are for people who can afford them. Ava stopped walking. Ethan took a few more steps before realizing she was not beside him anymore. When he turned, he saw her watching him, a mix of disappointment and curiosity in her eyes. I do not believe that, she said. And deep down, I do not think you do either. Ethan held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. He had spent years building his empire, climbing higher, making more. But as he stood there, soaked and exhausted, he wondered, had it been worth it? Before Ethan could respond, a voice called out from across the street. Ava, there you are. They turned to see an older woman walking toward them, her coat wrapped tightly around her small frame. Mrs. Lawson, one of Ava's longtime neighbors, had always been protective of her. The elderly woman smiled at Ava, but eyed Ethan with suspicion. I was hoping to see you before heading home. You know I worry when you are out late. Ava smiled. I am fine, Mrs. Lawson. Just helping someone who got stuck in the rain. Mrs. Lawson glanced at Ethan again before leaning in slightly. Be careful, dear. People like him. They take what they want and leave the rest behind. Ethan stiffened. He had heard those words before, whispers at charity galas, muttered judgments from people who saw him as nothing more than a symbol of greed. Ava frowned. Mrs. Lawson, that is not fair. Before she could say more, Ava's borrowed phone buzzed in her hand. She checked the screen. The mechanic is here. Ethan straightened his coat. I should go. Ava hesitated, then nodded. All right. For a second, it seemed like he wanted to say something more, but instead, he just gave her a small nod and turned toward his waiting car. Ava watched him leave, feeling a strange mix of emotions. She had helped him, but had she really reached him? That night, Ethan lay in the king-size bed of his luxury hotel suite, staring at the ceiling. The city lights flickered through the large windows, casting long shadows across the room. He should have been relieved. His car was fixed. The night was over. But his mind would not let go of the events that had unfolded. Ava's kindness, the cafe owner's judgment, Mrs. Lawson's warning, and the way Ava had talked about her dreams. Dreams she might never reach, not because she lacked ambition, but because the world had placed a price tag on opportunity. Ethan had spent his life proving that wealth meant power. But tonight, for the first time, he wondered if money could change something deeper. Across town, in a small, dimly lit house, Ava sat at the kitchen table with her mother. And he just left? Her mother asked, pouring herself a cup of tea. Ava nodded. Yeah. She sighed. I did not get it. He looked so lost. But the second he had a way out, he took it. Her mother gave her a knowing smile. People like that, they build walls so high, they forget how to climb back down. Ava traced a finger along the rim of her empty cup. I just wish things were different. For him, for me. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. Keep being who you are. That is all you can do. Ava forced a smile, but doubt lingered in her chest. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of voices outside. At first, she thought it was just the usual morning bustle. But then she heard something unusual. Car engines. Lots of them. She pulled back the curtains and gasped. A row of luxury cars lined the street in front of her house. Camera flashes lit up the air as reporters crowded the sidewalk. And right there, on her doorstep, sat a small, elegant package with her name on it. Her heart pounded. What was happening? Ava's hands trembled as she unwrapped the package. The elegant box fell out of place in her small, cluttered kitchen. Her mother stood nearby, watching with quiet anticipation. Inside, she found a neatly folded letter on thick, expensive paper. The handwriting was bold yet precise. Ava, I owe you more than just gratitude. That night, you showed me something I had long forgotten. That kindness does not come with a price tag. I have spent my life believing that wealth defines worth, but you proved me wrong in a matter of hours. I want to honor what you did for me. There is an event tomorrow night, and I would like you to be my guest. It is not charity. It is recognition for the person you are, Ethan Carter. Underneath the letter was an invitation embossed with gold lettering. It was for an exclusive gala at one of the city's most prestigious venues. Ava stared at it, unsure how to feel. Why would he do this? Her mother picked up the invitation, running her fingers over the elegant script. Maybe because you made him see the world differently. Ava exhaled, shaking her head. I did not help him for this. I just did what was right. Her mother smiled. That is exactly why you should go. Ava hesitated, but deep down she knew this could be more than just a fancy night. It could be a turning point. The venue was breathtaking. Chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, and the hum of polite conversation filled the grand ballroom. Ava, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown borrowed from a family friend, felt completely out of place. Ethan spotted her the moment she entered. Unlike the guarded man she had met days ago, tonight he seemed different, more present, more aware. As the event unfolded, Ethan took the stage, his deep voice commanding the room's attention. Tonight, we celebrate generosity, success, and the people who make a difference, he said, pausing as his eyes found Ava's. One of those people is here with us tonight. The spotlight shifted to her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Her name is Ava, and she changed my perspective in a single night. Without expecting anything in return, she showed me kindness when I least deserved it. Ava felt her face flush as applause filled the room. Ethan continued, her story is not unique. There are countless young people like her, full of potential but held back by circumstances beyond their control. That is why, in her honor, I am launching the Ava Williams Scholarship Fund to help students like her achieve their dreams. The applause grew thunderous. People smiled, nodding in admiration. But Ava sat frozen. Then, slowly, she stood. A hush fell over the crowd as she stepped forward, taking the microphone. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "This means a lot." But she took a breath, scanning the room filled with wealth and privilege. What about the others? What about the kids who will not be in the spotlight? What about the families who work twice as hard and still struggle? The room was silent now. Eyes widened. Some exchanged uneasy glances. "I am grateful for this opportunity," she continued. "But one scholarship does not change the fact that people like me fight every day for chances that some people here take for granted." Her words hung in the air. Ethan exhaled, gripping the edge of the podium. He had expected gratitude, not a challenge. But looking at Ava, her unwavering stance, her fearless honesty, he realized something. She was right. This was not about easing his conscience or making a single gesture. If he truly wanted to make a difference, he had to do more. Ethan turned back to the audience, nodding. "She is right," he admitted. "One scholarship is not enough." The room remained still. "That is why I'm making commitment," he continued. "Not just to Ava, but to real, lasting change. From this day forward, my company will expand its hiring programs to give underprivileged youth real opportunities. And we will increase our community investments, not as charity, but as a responsibility." A wave of emotion swept through the audience. Some applauded. Others nodded in understanding. Ava's eyes met Ethan's. For the first time, she saw not just a wealthy man, but a person who was truly listening. This was no longer just about one night. It was about something bigger. And it was only the beginning. Ava sat on the edge of her bed, her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages poured in from people who had seen the event. Some from strangers thanking her for speaking up. Others from students who felt seen for the first time. She scrolled through the overwhelming flood of support, still struggling to process everything. Just days ago, she had been working shifts at a small diner, worrying about tuition. Now, she was at the center of a conversation, much bigger than herself. Meanwhile, Ethan was already putting action behind his words. The scholarship fund was just the beginning. He met with his board, redirecting company resources to fund internship programs and community initiatives. For the first time in years, his decisions were driven by more than just profit. The next morning, a familiar figure appeared at Ava's door. The cafe owner who had refused to serve Ethan that night. He looked uneasy, clutching his cap in his hands. I saw the news," he muttered. "I did not know who he was. I was wrong." Ava studied him for a moment before stepping aside, letting him in. Later that week, Ethan made an unexpected move. Instead of holding a grudge, he quietly invested in small businesses in Ava's community, including the cafe. No speeches, no press releases, just action. As weeks passed, Ava settled into her new life. She was finally in college, something she had once only dreamed about. But even as she attended lectures and studied late into the night, she never forgot where she came from. The scholarship had lifted her burden, but she knew there were others still struggling. So she used her voice, advocating for fairness and equal opportunity wherever she could. Ethan, too, had changed. He no longer saw wealth as just a measure of power. Instead, he viewed it as a responsibility, one he had ignored for too long. He continued funding programs, making real changes within his company, and mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Through it all, he and Ava stayed in touch. What started as an unlikely encounter on a rainy night had turned into a men-to-men bond built on mutual respect. He guided her through business and leadership, while she kept him grounded, reminding him why real change had to start with people, not profits. Months later, Ava stood in front of a classroom filled with eager young students, their eyes full of hope. She had been invited to speak at a local school to share her journey. She looked at them and smiled. "Kindness does not cost anything," she said, "but it has the power to change everything." In the back of the room, Ethan watched quietly, his hands folded in his lap. He had once thought power came from money and influence. But watching Ava now, he realized true power came from something much deeper. She had believed in kindness when no one else had. She had stood up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. And in doing so, she had changed not only her own life, but his, too. As the students clapped and Ava stepped off the stage, she caught Ethan's eye. He gave her a small nod with a quiet pride. She walked forward, her future bright and boundless. And as the screen faded to black, one truth remained: justice, redemption, and kindness could change lives in ways no one could ever expect.